It was a beautiful summer day. My 5-year-old son James was playing in the backyard of our house in the suburbs. James was a quiet boy. He played a lot alone. He never had many friends, but he always had a scary imagination. I was feeding my dog Fido in the kitchen when I heard James talking to someone in the backyard. I don't know who talked to him. Did he finally have friends? Being a single mother, it's hard when I have to keep an eye on my child all the time, so I decided to go to the backyard and check it out. When I got to the backyard I was a little confused, because there was only James there. Had he been talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard someone else's voice just now. "James, time to get in the house. Call me to him." He came in and sat down at the dining table. It was lunchtime, so I made him a turkey sandwich. "James, who were you talking to outside?" I asked. James looked up for a moment. "I'm playing with my new friend," replied James with a smile. I poured him a glass of milk and continued to bring it up again, the way any good mother used to do. "Does your friend have a name? Why don't you invite him to have lunch with you?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment and replied his name is Laughing Jack. I'm a little confused by what he said. "Oh. It is a strange name. What's your friend like?" I asked confusedly. "He is a clown. He has long hair with a large cone nose. He has long sleeves and wears baggy pants and striped socks, and he's always smiling." I realized that my son was talking about his imaginary friend. I think it's normal for a kid his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he doesn't have anyone to play with. This is probably just his stage when he's still a child. The day passed as usual. It was almost late, so I took James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on the nightlight before I closed the door. I was really tired, so I decided to go to bed not long after that. I had a terrible nightmare. Dark. I was in an amusement park that was not working. I was scared, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken rides, and abandoned game huts. Everywhere looked horrible. All in black and white, dolls can be seen hanging from strings in the game huts, with sinister smiles stitched on the dolls' faces. I felt like the whole amusement park was looking at me, even though there wasn't a living thing to be seen there. Then all of a sudden, I started to hear music turning on. The sound of Pop Goes the Weasel from a music player echoes throughout the amusement park. It hypnotizes me. I followed the song to the circus tent until I was almost unconscious, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. In pitch darkness, the only light came from a single beam of light that came from inside the circus tent. The music grew slower as I walked towards the light. I found myself singing without stopping. All around the mulberry bush. The monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought was all in fun. The music stops just before the climax, and suddenly the light turns towards me. The intensity of the light blinded my eyes. All I could see were black shadows heading towards me. And another image appears, and appears, and appears again. Until there were a dozen of them, all moving towards me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen. All I could do was watch the shadows come closer. As they got closer I could see. They are children. After I looked at each of them, I noticed they were all disfigured and with mutilated bodies. Some had sharp wounds all over their bodies, and some had very bad burns, and others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children surround me, clawed at my body, dragged me to the ground, and tore my body deep inside. As the children tore and tore at my body, I slowly disappeared. All I could hear was laughter, ghastly and evil laughter. I woke up in the morning in a cold sweat. After taking a deep breath, I turned to the side and saw James' action figures on the shelf all facing towards me. I sighed. James might have woken up earlier and put his toys here. I collected James' toys and walked to James' room, but when I opened the door, James was asleep. I just shrugged and put James' toys in their place, and headed to the living room. Shortly after that, James woke up and I prepared his breakfast. He looked quiet and a little nervous, maybe he didn't sleep well. I decided to ask him about the toys. "James, my son, did you put your toys in my room this morning?" Her eyes lifted for a moment and quickly looked down at her cereal again. "Laughing Jack did it?" I responded, "Okay, tell Laughing Jack to keep your toys in your room." James nodded and finished his breakfast, then headed out to the backyard. I was relaxing in the living room and drifted off to sleep, so I woke up 2 hours after that. Unlucky. I have to check on James. I was a little worried, it had been 2 hours since I wasn't watching him. I stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was so worried and I screamed, "James! James! Where are you?" After that I heard laughter from the front yard. I opened the fence and stepped in front of the house. James was sitting by the road. I breathed a sigh of relief and approached him. "James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard?" "James, what are you eating?" James saw me and took out a handful of colorful candy from his pocket. This made me very nervous. "James, who gave you candy?" James just looked at me and didn't speak. "James, please, tell Mama, where did you get those candies?" James said, "Laughing Jack gave it to me." I knelt down to meet his eyes. "James, I'm fed up with this Laughing Jack thing, he's nothing. Now in this serious situation and I want to know who gave you candy." I saw my son shed tears, "But Mom, Laughing Jack gave it to me." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James never lied to me, but the things he said were impossible. I told him to take the candy out, and I threw the rest away. Maybe I overreacted. She could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or from Mr. Walker down the road. I'm going to keep a closer eye on James. That night I put James to bed as usual, and I decided to go to bed early. Suddenly I was awakened by the sound of a slamming door from the kitchen. I got out of bed and quickly ran down the stairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was scared. Everything from the opposite direction had been knocked to the floor, and my dog Fido was hanging to death. His stomach had been torn open and filled with candy, just like the candy James had eaten at that time. My surprise was added to the loud screams that came from James' room, followed by a very loud slam. I quickly grabbed a knife from the cupboard and climbed the stairs with the speed only a mother of a child in danger can have. I broke down the door and turned on the bedroom light. Everything in the room was messy and slammed on the floor. My poor son was on his bed crying and scared. I took my son and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily they were still not asleep. They let me use their phone and I called the police. It didn't take long for the police to come, and I explained what had happened. They thought I was crazy. They checked the whole house and found only a dead dog and 2 messy rooms. The cop told me someone did all that before running away quickly when he heard me coming up the stairs. I know that's not true. All the doors were locked, and none of the windows were open. Whoever did that couldn't have come from outside my house. The next day James stayed in the house. I didn't want him to disappear from my sight. I went into the garage and found James' old baby monitor and set it up in his room. If anyone is in his room tonight, I will be able to hear it. I went into the kitchen and took a large knife from the cupboard and put it on top of my drawer. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not going to let anyone hurt my son. Finally night came. I put James to bed. He was scared, but I promised him that I wouldn't let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, and gave him a kiss, and turned on the night light. Before closing the door I whispered to him, "Good night James, Mama loves you." I tried to stay awake as long as I could, but after a few hours I was overcome by sleepiness. My son will be safe for tonight and I need some sleep. But as I lay my head on the pillow, I hear the soft sound of the baby monitor I put on top of the drawer. At first it sounded distracting, like the sound you'd hear over a radio. Then it turned into a whimpering sound. Is James sleeping? Then I heard it, the laugh from my nightmare, that horrible laugh. I got out of bed and took a knife from under the pillow. I rushed to James' room, and kicked the door open. I tried to turn on the light, but it won't turn on. I stepped inside and I could feel warm thick liquid on my feet. James's body was nailed to the wall, the nails piercing his hands and feet. His chest was ripped open and his internal organs splattered onto the floor. His eyes and tongue were gone and almost all of his teeth had been pulled out. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my dear child. Then I heard it again, a desperate moan. James is alive. My son, my poor child, while in so much pain he is still trying to live. I exited the room and vomited on the floor, but was interrupted by a horrible chuckle coming from behind me. I looked away while still cleaning the bitter liquid from my mouth, then appeared from the shadows, the demon who had created all this horror, Laughing Jack. His ghostly white skin and covered in black hair fell to his shoulders. He had ghastly white eyes surrounded by black circles. Her crazy smile revealed sharp serrated teeth, and her skin didn't look like real skin, it almost looked like rubber or plastic. He was dressed in shabby black and white clothes, with striped sleeves and socks. Her body was ridiculous too, her long arms reaching past her waist and the way she balanced her body made her look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He laughed in disgust to show me how pleased he was to see my reaction to his work. Then he circled back to face James and started laughing back at the horrific scene he had staged. It was enough to terrorize me, I snapped. Get away from my son, you fuck. I rushed at the monster with the knife raised under my head, and stabbed at it, but the moment the knife touched it, it disappeared into black smoke. The knife that had failed to kill the monster, still kept aiming and piercing James still beating hard, splashed warm blood on my face. No. What have I done? My son, I killed my son. Instantly I dropped to my knees, and I could hear police sirens in the distance getting louder. My son, my sweet son, my dear son. Mama promised that I would protect you. But I failed. I'm sorry, Mama James. Mama is very, very sorry. The police soon arrived and found me in front of my son, still holding the knife covered in my son's blood. The trial was short. I was suspected of mental illness. I was placed in the Fyropolis house specifically for criminals based on mental illness, which is where I have been since 2 months ago. For me, it's not that bad in here. The only reason I'm up now is because someone is playing Pop Goes the Weasel from outside my window. I'll tell the nurse about this in the morning.